Hey, what is up everybody? This is Blackblade and welcome back to Blackblade's Backlog Babble, the show that goes so fast, the explanation's in the video description. I've been on a hack and slash binge lately, so today I wanted to talk about two games from my favorite genre that I've been meaning to get around to since I made the editorial last year. Without further ado, let's go! I've been increasingly becoming a huge fan of the God of War series, but throughout all that time, Dantes Inferno has been high on my list of games I wanted to play. From numerous sources, I've been told this game is a complete clone of the trilogy that cemented hack and slashes as my favorite genre. But rather than be turned away by that fact, it actually piqued my curiosity further. The format of the God of War games does not have to be solely unique to them, just so long as it wasn't leeching off every element that makes it work without anything new or interesting to add. Dantes Inferno at times comes dangerously close to stepping across that line, but overall I found it to be a fun, fascinating, and relatively good game, even if falling far short of its inspiration. So let's start out by talking about what I enjoyed most about this game, as well as what separates it the most from God of War. And to do that, we have to mix up my usual approach to discussing games and cover the story first. Dantes Inferno follows, well, Dante, a crusader who committed numerous sins during his time. After returning home from a near-death experience, he finds his wife slain, and her soul taken by Lucifer. He follows her, leading him into the circles of hell as he faces his past trials and transgressions to absolve her sins and bring her soul to heaven, no matter the cost. Based directly on the poems by Dante Alighieri, did I say that right? I'm keeping it. This story is a fantastic homage to a true classic, and the character of Dante is a compelling one, always with something interesting to offer in each of the many trials he faces. I especially enjoyed the fact that he's voiced by Graham McTavish, an individual whom always stands out to me, especially from his portrayals of Dracula in the Netflix Castlevania series, and Dwalin, my favorite dwarf from the Hobbit trilogy. It also makes the behind the scenes of those movies more entertaining knowing he voiced for this game beforehand.
This one grasps your soul. This one keeps it.
Anyway, Dante is a terrific example of a flawed protagonist working in a way separate from Kratos. Whilst Angry Spartan Boy is more an unstoppable machine hell-bent on escaping his mistakes, Dante is forced to confront his misdoings firsthand. And more important than fighting his way through everything, he's equally challenged with having to show humility. It's the driving force of the narrative, and I love how they utilized it. When it comes to the story of other hack and slash games, this one is perhaps not the absolute best, but it gets a pretty respectable second. I also loved how fully realized the circles of hell were. This falls into the graphic design as well as the story, but each circle, most of which based on major sins such as greed, gluttony, or lust, perfectly encapsulate the vilest nature of each. I would use examples, but it's kind of hard to. I mean, the circle of lust would get me permabanned from YouTube, so I'm just gonna play it safe and say they match the worst expectations my mind could possibly fathom. And of course, taking place in hell and having to hear the wails of the damned regularly, this game would require some pretty commendable sound design to be effectively pulled off. And my gosh, they outshone themselves. This was before sounds linked to actions in games sounding like their real-life counterparts was the norm, seeing as folks were still moving past the era of hypercompression. Not only was it able to accomplish that though, but there was a great deal of creativity on display when it came to the sounds of more fantastical things, like the cross blasts, which hit about as hard as my substitute geography teacher. Unfortunately though, just because of my hearing, I only appreciated this as much as I did after intently focusing on it, but I had an easier time being able to appreciate the soundtrack. It's got a selection of instruments, giving it a dramatic video game score that draws a lot from Holy Roman musical staples, such as with the choir pitches and resonant percussion. It's one of those soundtracks that I can't immediately name a bunch of standouts off the top of my head, not because they didn't stand out, but more they work great in the game and I find to be harder to pinpoint outside of that context. An exception to this though is the track Bleeding Karen, which is the one you're hearing in the background of this segment. Pretty cool, eh? So this game nailed the story and nailed the presentation. That's where this game stands apart from God of War. But then we get into the gameplay. Now, let me preface this by saying I had fun with Dantes Inferno. It has a lot of cool combat abilities with great synergy between attacks. The set piece design had a lot of effort put into it and it shows, and related, the boss battles are glorious. However, it is within the gameplay that the biggest problem I had in playing this game was revealed. See, it doesn't just feel like they're trying to copy the formula of the God of War series, but rather the first game in particular, a game that came out 5 years before this one. As such, in just about every element of game design, it feels especially dated compared to the standards of the time. This released within a month of God of War 3, likely what destroyed its chance of getting a sequel at that time. Despite that, this game suffers from issues more prevalent from games of the genre in the previous generation. This includes things like the fixed camera angles being placed in spots awkward for gameplay sequences, set pieces having extremely narrow windows of precision to overcome, and worst of all, that artificial difficulty feel that was becoming mostly phased out by the time it released. One example of this that frustrated me the most is how enemy evasion works. Some enemies have next to impossible to notice cues that they'll counter if you hit them with another attack. Some dodge just about everything, requiring you to immediately parry or take a heavy hit, and the most annoying thing, despite the number of enemies you face at a given time, even the dang minion tier creatures can bypass your standard attacks via super armor, getting a hit off because you were locked in a move that just so happens to be one that didn't affect them. If this game were 5 years older, these problems could be easily overlooked, but just because of the expectations I set for myself due to the time it released, it felt practically amateurish. Did it ruin my experience overall though? No, absolutely not. Dantes Inferno was a ride through hell that could only ever come from the developers of Dead Space, and ultimately I'm glad I got around to playing through it. The flaws of this game had me go back and forth on my definitive feelings about it, but ultimately, I feel this game was worth the wait. Speaking of video games about characters named Dante, so I have a confession. Yes, as I've stated many times, including towards the beginning of this video, hack and slash games are my favorite game genre. Despite that, however, I had never really gotten into Devil May Cry, the most popular series of the bunch and arguably the one that officially established the genre conventions. In my defense, I've had the HD collection and DMC5 on my shelf for a while, so I thought, what the heck, let's finally knock those out, starting with the original, or rather its re-release on the Xbox One version of the collection. Devil May Cry was quite the experience. Beyond calling it good or bad, I'd say it was an interesting case study into the scene of action games at the turn of the century. Being frank, it's hard to conceive where I should start, so I guess I'll go with the presentation and feel. The knowledge that this game was originally intended to be Resident Evil 4 has become well enough known that I add that in the back of my mind, but I think even if I hadn't known, I would have had my suspicions. The model work for characters and environments, the lighting, the camera angles chosen, much of this game's presentation screams its game of origin. It's actually really cool to see that one of Capcom's flagship series in its youth felt so much like an ambitious spin-off of another they own. Now with that heavy relation to classic Resident Evil, I was concerned what to expect from the controls, as I am not a fan of tank-like movement systems, and classic RE is the best known series for that. Well, while it is a little more fluid than that, Devil May Cry's movement is a lot more jagged or awkward than I expected. I could tell the more you play it, the better it feels, but I guess just due to me growing up in a different time of games, while I was eventually able to understand it, I didn't necessarily enjoy it. As for the combat itself, I think I was misled here. When I think of Devil May Cry, at least from an outsider perspective, I think of these spectacular juggle combos in which you launch an enemy in the air and he doesn't come back down until his corpse resembles a squashed grape. Well, maybe it was too early on in 3D action games for me to expect that here, because that is not what I got. In all my time playing it, I was never able to quite get a feel for the flow of gameplay. It feels like it's supposed to be more stylish, but more often than not requires you play it defensively along the lines of God of War. I reference that series too much. Let's go with Return of the King instead. I think this is most hurt by the lack of a block button. With the pace of later games in the series, judging by my impressions on playing the demo of Devil May Cry 5, the flow of combat is so quick, being able to stand still and press block would considerably break it. With this one though, little things like that streamline fights to where you're forced to play it in this awkward blend of using offensive moves defensively. You know what? I'm confusing myself even writing this, so I'm just gonna move on. The story in Devil May Cry is where this game feels the most like a product of the times, but I don't mean that in a bad way. As opposed to the grandiose epics with 1,800 characters to follow and thousands of plot lines all told in such a dramatic manner that they lack nuance or individual connection that you see a lot in games today, Devil May Cry's story is more simplistic. In it, you play as Dante, a sellsword with his own business for hunting and killing demons named Devil May Cry. One day, a woman named Trish shows up, deciding doors are a relic of the past.
Whoa, slow down, babe.
And requests his services to defeat a demon lord named Mundus. That's it. Like I said, simple. Because it's that simple, there's not much for me to critique, and I'm fine with that. This story's just straightforward, fun, and serves the game appropriately. I will say the lore this game sets up is a standout, so there's at least something abnormally of note. I really don't have that much more to say. Devil May Cry was certainly a humble beginning to the franchise, and I'm rather conflicted on how I feel about it. Is it good? Yeah, I'd say so. Did I have fun with it at points? Absolutely. I guess it's just this game's age that has me so confused. Rather than saying whether or not it was worth the wait in terms of my enjoyment, I'll instead conclude with this. Playing Devil May Cry today is like taking a history lesson on the origins of the hack and slash genre. It's not good, it's not bad, it simply is. And taking that into consideration, I'm glad I had the opportunity to see how it all began. Thank you all for watching. I made the observation that, for the most part, these videos are getting longer, and my other content is adjusting accordingly. None of this is by intention, rather I feel in my growth as a game analyst, I'm having more to say with each game I discuss. I can't be absolutely certain though, so I want to survey public opinion, and that means you all. Let me know in the comments how you feel about the length of my recent videos. Does it feel they're getting too long? Is it for good reasons? How do you think I should respond to it? Your feedback helps me adjust my videos accordingly to provide what you all want to see. And as I'm taking YouTube more seriously than ever before, that's an invaluable resource to have. Anyways, slice that like button in half, subscribe to my channel if you are new, take care, and have fun.